How far would you go to keep custody of your kids? 6 months of brutal custody hearings had led me to this moment, watching my judge dismiss everything I said while believing every single word from my ex-wife. Your Honor, he left our son alone for 3 hours while he went to some bar, Rachel said, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. I have witnesses. I shot up from my chair. That's a complete lie. I was at a work meeting and my neighbor Mrs. Foster was, Mr. Brooks, please sit down. Judge Sterling cut me off without even looking my way. His eyes stayed glued to Rachel like she was some kind of saint. This was the 4th hearing, and it was happening again. Every single lie that came out of her mouth somehow became gospel truth in his courtroom. I've documented every incident, Rachel continued, sliding a thick folder across the table toward the judge. Late pickups, missed school events, inappropriate language around our son. What inappropriate language? I demanded. I've never... Mr. Brooks. Judge Sterling's voice had that familiar edge of annoyance. You'll have your opportunity to respond, but I wouldn't. I knew that now. In 3 previous hearings, my opportunity had lasted maybe 10 minutes while Rachel got to perform her one-woman show for hours. She pulled out photo after photo, all carefully staged to make me look like the world's worst father. This is from last month when he picked up Jeremy with a stained shirt, she said, holding up a blurry picture of me at my car. And here's Jeremy after spending the weekend with his father. Notice how exhausted he looks. My kid looked tired because we'd stayed up until midnight, finishing his science fair project. The same project Rachel had forgotten to tell me about when she dropped him off on Friday. I'm genuinely worried about Jeremy's safety. Rachel dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. His father just doesn't seem capable of providing stable care. Judge Sterling leaned forward, studying her photos like they were evidence in a crime scene. These are very troubling, Miss Sullivan. Thank you for understanding, Your Honor, Rachel said with that perfectly practiced, sad smile. My lawyer nudged me to stay calm, but I was gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles had turned white. This woman had cheated on me with her personal trainer, had maxed out 3 credit cards on shopping sprees, and had once left Jeremy with a babysitter for an entire weekend while she went to Atlantic City. But somehow, I was the dangerous parent. Your Honor, I tried again. If I could just show you my documentation, we'll review your materials after Ms. Sullivan completes her testimony. Rachel's smile widened just a fraction. She knew she owned this courtroom. I hate to say this, she continued, but I'm starting to think unsupervised visits might not be safe anymore. Maybe we should consider supervised visitation only. Absolutely not, the words exploded out of me. You are not taking my son away from me based on lies. Judge Sterling's gavel slammed down. Mr. Brooks, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt of court. Rachel's eyes practically sparkled. Every outburst, every moment of frustration just proved her narrative that I was unstable and unfit. I forced myself back into my seat, but inside I was screaming. This wasn't about justice or what was best for Jeremy. This was theater, and somehow Rachel had written herself the starring role. The hearing dragged on for another 90 minutes. Rachel presented her case like she was auditioning for an Oscar, every pause calculated, every tear perfectly timed. When Judge Sterling finally called on me, he was already shuffling papers and glancing at his watch. I believe we have sufficient information to proceed, he announced before I'd gotten through even half of my prepared statement. We'll reconvene next Friday for final arguments and my ruling. As we filed out of the courtroom, Rachel brushed past me, practically glowing with confidence. See you Friday, Danny, she whispered. Hope you've got your weekend plans figured out, because they're about to change permanently. I stood in that courthouse hallway watching her strut away with her lawyer, both of them radiating the kind of satisfaction that comes from a sure victory. My own attorney was already packing his briefcase, muttering about preparing for limited visitation rights. That's when it finally clicked. This had nothing to do with evidence or testimony or Jeremy's best interests. Judge Sterling had decided my fate before I'd ever stepped foot in his courtroom. The only question was why he seemed so determined to destroy me. I had 1 week to figure it out. My phone started buzzing before I even made it to the parking garage. Rachel's sister Vanessa was first. Danny, I just heard from Rachel about the hearing today. Her voice had that fake sympathy tone that made me want to throw my phone against the wall. She's really worried about Jeremy's well-being. Maybe it's time to consider what's best for him. What's best for him is having his father in his life, I said, fumbling for my car keys. Well, from what she told me, you've been pretty unstable lately. Missing pickups, showing up drunk. I have never shown up drunk anywhere. The words came out sharper than I intended. Rachel is lying, Vanessa. Why would she lie about something like that? She's just trying to protect her son. Her son. Not our son. Not Jeremy. Her son. I hung up without saying goodbye. The second call came from my buddy Pete as I was pulling out of the courthouse parking lot. Dude, what the hell is going on? Rachel just posted on social media about praying for Jeremy's safety during this difficult time. She posted what? It's all vague, but she's making it sound like you're dangerous. People are commenting, asking if Jeremy is okay. My wife is asking me if I think you're having some kind of breakdown. I pulled over at a gas station and opened Facebook on my phone. There it was, posted 20 minutes ago. Please keep Jeremy in your thoughts and prayers during this challenging time. As a mother, sometimes you have to make difficult decisions to protect your child. Grateful for the legal system that puts children's safety first. Mama Bears, protect Dr. Justice for children. The comments were already pouring in. Stay strong, Mama. You're so brave. Hope Jeremy stays safe. Every single comment assumed I was some kind of monster. I screenshotted the post and immediately called my lawyer, Richard Hoffman. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding tired. Richard, she's posting about the case on social media. Isn't that against some kind of rule? What exactly did she post? I read him the whole thing word for word. It's manipulative, but it's not technically violating any court orders. She's not mentioning specifics about the case, just playing the victim card. But people are going to assume, Danny, I'm going to be straight with you. After today's hearing, I think we need to prepare for the possibility that Judge Sterling is going to award Rachel primary custody with limited visitation rights for you. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Based on what? Her lies? Based on the fact that he clearly believes her version of events over yours. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen a judge so obviously biased against a client. So what do? We prepare for appeal, but that could take months, maybe longer. In the meantime, you might be looking at supervised visits only. After I hung up, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching normal people pump gas and buy snacks like their worlds weren't falling apart. Rachel had managed to turn me into a pariah in the span of a single Facebook post. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, people commenting on her post, friends asking if I was okay, neighbors suddenly being very careful about what they said. When I finally got home, Mrs. Foster from next door was waiting by her mailbox. She'd watched Jeremy dozens of times when I had work emergencies, always said what a polite kid he was. "Oh, Danny," she said, but her voice had changed, cooler, more distant. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Foster, just dealing with some legal stuff." "Well, if you ever need anything." She trailed off, but I could see it in her eyes. Rachel's social media campaign was already working. The woman who trusted me with her spare house key was now looking at me like I might be dangerous. "Actually, Mrs. Foster, I was hoping you might be willing to write a character reference for me, for the court case. You've seen how Jeremy and I interact. You know I'm a good father." "Oh, I don't think I should get involved in legal matters," she said quickly, already backing toward her front door. "I'm sure it will all work out for the best." She disappeared inside before I could say another word. That night, I tried calling my brother in Denver, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with my college roommate. Same with 3 different coworkers. Either everyone was suddenly busy, or word was spreading faster than I could control it. The only person who answered was my mom, and even she sounded worried. "Danny, honey, what's really going on? Rachel called me today, said she was concerned about your mental state. She mentioned you've been acting erratic, missing work." "Mom, I haven't missed work. I haven't done anything she's accusing me of." "Well, why would she make things up?" She seemed genuinely worried about Jeremy's safety. Even my own mother was starting to doubt me. I paced around my empty apartment, the same apartment Rachel had claimed was unsuitable for a child, because it only had 2 bedrooms, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. 6 hours ago, I'd been a father fighting for time with his son. Now I was apparently the neighborhood crazy person that everyone crossed the street to avoid. Rachel was good at this. She'd always been good at controlling narratives, making herself the victim while painting everyone else as the villain. But this was different. This was surgical. This was someone who knew exactly which buttons to push and when to push them. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. "Saw Rachel's post. Jeremy deserves better than a father who can't get his act together. Step aside before you hurt that kid." I turned off my phone and sat in the dark, wondering how many more people Rachel had already convinced that I was the enemy. "Danny, we need to talk." My boss Janet called me into her office first thing Monday morning, and I knew Rachel had gotten to her too. "Let me guess. Someone told you I'm an unfit father and a danger to society." Janet closed her door and gestured for me to sit. "Look, I've known you for 3 years. You're one of our most reliable employees. But I got a call this weekend from someone claiming to be concerned about your mental health." "Rachel called you directly?" "She said she was worried you might be having some kind of breakdown, that you've been missing work, showing up intoxicated, making threats." I stared at her. "Janet, have I missed a single day of work in the past 6 months? Have you ever seen me intoxicated? Have I ever threatened anyone?" "No, but nothing. She's lying. She's trying to destroy my life so she can take my son away from me." Janet shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Danny, I want to believe you, but the way you're talking right now, you sound paranoid. Maybe you should consider taking some time off, getting some help." There it was, the trap Rachel had set so perfectly. The angrier I got about her lies, the more unstable I looked. The more I tried to defend myself, the more people thought I was losing it. I don't need time off. I need people to stop believing everything my ex-wife tells them. Look, I'm not saying I believe her, but maybe you should talk to someone, a professional, just to get some perspective. I walked out of her office knowing that my job was now hanging by a thread. One more concerned call from Rachel, and I'd probably be unemployed on top of everything else. At lunch, I tried meeting my friend Kevin at our usual spot downtown. We'd been grabbing sandwiches together every Monday for 2 years, talking about sports and complaining about work. Normal guy stuff. "Hey man," Kevin said when I sat down, but he wasn't making eye contact. "So, how's the custody thing going?" "Terrible. Rachel is spreading lies about me and somehow everyone believes her." "Yeah, about that." Kevin picked at his sandwich. "My wife saw that Facebook post, and then Rachel messaged her privately, said some pretty concerning stuff about you." "What kind of stuff?" "Danny, she said you've been following her, that you've been parked outside her apartment at night, watching her windows. She's scared you might do something violent." I put down my sandwich. "Kevin, I have never followed Rachel anywhere. I have never been to her apartment except to pick up Jeremy for my scheduled visits. I have never threatened violence against anyone in my entire life. But you're getting pretty worked up right now." "Because she's lying about me." Kevin held up his hands. Okay. I'm just saying maybe you should be careful how you react to all this. People are watching. People are watching." Translation. Everyone in our friend group was now treating me like a potential threat. "Kevin, you've known me for 5 years. Do you really think I'm capable of stalking someone?" He hesitated just long enough to break something inside me. "I don't know what to think, man. Sarah says women don't usually make this stuff up without reason." I left the restaurant without finishing my lunch. That afternoon, I got a call from Jeremy's school. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, wanted to discuss some concerns about the pickup arrangements. "Mr. Brooks, we received some troubling information from Jeremy's mother about your current mental state. She's requested that we not release Jeremy to you during your scheduled pickup times until the court case is resolved." "She can't do that. I have legal visitation rights. We're just trying to protect Jeremy's well-being. Ms. Sullivan showed us some documentation suggesting you might be unstable." "What documentation? What did she show you?" "I can't discuss the specifics, but we have a responsibility to ensure student safety. Perhaps you could arrange supervised visits for now." I hung up and immediately called Richard. He sounded even more tired than before. "They can't legally prevent you from picking up Jeremy during your court-ordered visitation time," he said. "But if they're claiming safety concerns, it gets complicated. We'd have to file an emergency motion. So do it." "Danny, filing emergency motions right before the final hearing might make you look desperate. Unstable. It could hurt us. Everything hurt us. Fighting back hurt us. Not fighting back hurt us." Rachel had created a perfect no-win situation. That evening, I drove to Jeremy's soccer practice, hoping to at least see my son from the sidelines. I'd coached his team last year, knew all the other parents, had helped organize the team fundraiser. I parked and walked toward the field, but before I got halfway there, 3 other fathers stepped in front of me. "Hey, Danny," said Rodriguez, Jeremy's teammate's dad. "Maybe you should head home today. I'm just here to watch my son play soccer. Look, we don't want any drama. Rachel told us about the situation. Maybe it's better if you give Jeremy some space right now." "I'm not causing drama. I'm standing on a public field watching my kid play sports." "The thing is," said another dad, one I'd barbecued with just 6 months ago, "you're making some of the moms nervous. They're worried about their kid's safety. Like I was some kind of predator." I looked past them to the field. where Jeremy was running drills with his teammates. He hadn't seen me yet. Part of me wanted to push past these guys and go hug my son, tell him that everything was going to be okay. But I could see Rachel on the other side of the field, talking to a group of mothers, probably spinning more lies about me. Fine, I said, backing toward my car. But this is insane. You people know me. We thought we did, Rodriguez muttered. I drove home feeling like a ghost, like I was disappearing from my own life one person at a time. Rachel wasn't just trying to take Jeremy away from me. She was erasing me completely, turning me into someone so toxic that decent people couldn't risk being associated with me. My phone had 17 missed calls when I got home, all from my mother. Danny, thank God, she said when I called her back. Rachel called me again. She's saying you tried to approach Jeremy at his soccer game and had to be removed by other parents. She's worried you're going to do something desperate. Mom, I went to watch my son play soccer. That's what fathers do. But honey, if everyone is saying the same thing about you, maybe you need to consider that there might be some truth to it. Maybe you're not seeing your own behavior clearly. My own mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd seen me be gentle with injured animals and patient with elderly neighbors. Even she was starting to believe I was the monster Rachel had painted. I'm not crazy, Mom. I know you don't think you are, sweetheart. But sometimes when people are under a lot of stress, they don't realize how they're coming across to others. Maybe you should talk to someone. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the photo of Jeremy on my refrigerator, his gap-toothed smile from last Christmas, when we'd built a snowman in my backyard, and he'd insisted on giving it my old baseball cap. Back when I was still his dad instead of the dangerous stranger everyone was protecting him from. Rachel had turned my entire world upside down in less than a week. Every relationship, every connection, every piece of my normal life was now contaminated by her lies. And the worst part was how perfectly she'd engineered it. Every move I made to defend myself only proved her point that I was unstable. Every person who turned away from me gave her story more credibility. I was drowning in quicksand, and the harder I struggled, the deeper I sank. Tuesday morning brought a knock at my door at 7 a.m. 2 police officers stood on my doorstep, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Brooks, we need to ask you a few questions about a harassment complaint. A harassment complaint? Your ex-wife filed a report yesterday claiming you've been following her, calling her repeatedly and showing up at her workplace. She says she's afraid for her safety. I invited them in, trying to stay calm. Officers, I haven't called Rachel in 2 weeks. I haven't been to her workplace ever. The only time I've seen her is at court hearings and Jeremy's soccer practice. The older cop, Officer Martinez, pulled out a notepad. She provided phone records showing 17 calls from your number on Sunday night. I called my mother 17 times Sunday night. You can check the call logs. Rachel's number isn't in there. Do you have proof of that? I grabbed my phone and showed them my call history. Martinez compared it to his notes, looking confused. Interesting. She also claims you were parked outside her apartment building Monday evening around 6 p.m. I was at Jeremy's soccer practice until 5:30. Then I went straight home. You can ask the other parents. I paused. Actually, no, don't ask them. They all think I'm crazy now, too. The younger officer raised an eyebrow. Why would they think that? Because Rachel has been telling everyone I'm dangerous and unstable, and people believe her. They exchanged glances. Great. Now I sounded paranoid to the cops, too. Look, Mr. Brooks, Martinez said, we're not finding evidence to support these specific claims, but we need you to understand that any contact with your ex-wife outside of court-ordered visitation could be seen as harassment. After they left, I called Richard in a panic. She's filing false police reports now. Can we use that against her? Only if we can prove they're false. And Danny, calling the police to complain about your ex-wife filing false reports is exactly the kind of thing that makes you look unstable. So what do? Nothing. Document everything. Keep records of where you are and when. And for God's sake, don't go anywhere near Rachel or Jeremy until the hearing. I can't see my own son because she's making up stories. Right now, yes, I'm sorry, but that's where we are. That afternoon, I got a call from my apartment manager. Mrs. Patterson sounded nervous. Danny, I hate to do this, but we've had some complaints from other tenants. They're saying you've been acting strange, yelling at people, making them feel unsafe. Mrs. Patterson, I haven't yelled at anyone. I barely talk to my neighbors. Well, someone called about loud music and shouting coming from your apartment at all hours, and Mrs. Foster mentioned you approached her aggressively last week. The lies were spreading like wildfire, getting bigger and more creative with each retelling. I asked Mrs. Foster to write a character reference. That's not approaching someone aggressively. Look, I don't want to evict you, but if the complaints continue, I might not have a choice. Maybe try to keep a lower profile. Keep a lower profile, like I was the problem. Wednesday brought a new horror. I found out through Pete that Rachel had created a private Facebook group called Protecting Our Children and had invited half the neighborhood to join. According to Pete's wife, who'd been added to the group, Rachel was sharing updates about my increasingly erratic behavior, complete with photos of my car that she claimed were taken outside her apartment and Jeremy's school. Dude, she's got pictures of your license plate and everything, Pete told me over the phone. She's telling people you're stalking her and that the police aren't taking it seriously enough. Those photos could be from anywhere. She could have taken them months ago. I know that, but other people don't. The group has like 50 members now. Parents from Jeremy's school, people from the soccer league, neighbors. Everyone's sharing stories about concerning interactions they've had with you. I felt sick. What kind of stories? Stupid stuff. Mrs. Wilson from down the street said you gave her a threatening look at the grocery store last month. That dad from Jeremy's soccer team claims you were acting aggressive during a game last season. It's all garbage, but when you put it all together like that, it looks like a pattern. Exactly. And Rachel keeps posting about how scared she is, how she's just trying to protect Jeremy, how the system is failing to keep dangerous men away from their kids. That evening, I made the mistake of trying to go to the gym. I'd been going to the same place for 3 years, knew the staff, had worked out with some of the same guys for months. But when I walked in, conversations stopped. People stared. The front desk girl, who usually chatted with me about weekend plans, barely made eye contact. Hey Danny, said Troy, a guy I'd spotted for bench press dozens of times. Maybe tonight's not the best night for a workout. Why not? Look man, people are talking about you and your ex-wife situation. Some of the women here are uncomfortable. Uncomfortable about what? I'm here to lift weights, same as always. I know, but with everything going on, maybe give it a few weeks until things cool down? I left without working out. Another piece of my normal life stripped away. Thursday morning, I woke up to find my car keyed. Long, deep scratches across both sides and "stay away" carved into the hood. I called the police, but Officer Martinez just sighed when he saw my name on the report. Any idea who might have done this? Probably someone from my ex-wife's Facebook hate group. Mr. Brooks, you need to be careful about making making accusations without evidence. That kind of talk doesn't help your situation. My situation? Someone vandalized my car because of lies my ex-wife is spreading. Look, I understand you're frustrated, but maybe consider that your behavior might be contributing to some of these problems. My behavior, like breathing, was now considered suspicious activity. Friday afternoon, Richard called with the worst news yet. Danny, I just got off the phone with opposing counsel. Rachel is requesting an emergency restraining order. She's claiming you violated the police warning by driving past her apartment building yesterday. I didn't drive past her apartment building. I don't even know where she lives now. She has a witness. Says you slowed down and stared at her windows around 4 p.m. I checked my phone for yesterday's timeline. Richard, I was at work until 6 yesterday. I have security badge records. I was in meetings with 12 other people from 3 to 5 p.m. Good. We can fight this. But Danny, if she gets this restraining order, even temporarily, it's going to look terrible in front of Judge Sterling. How much worse can it look? He already thinks I'm a monster. It can always get worse. That night, I sat in my vandalized car in a grocery store parking lot, afraid to go home because I didn't know what fresh hell Rachel had prepared for me there. She wasn't just trying to take Jeremy away anymore. She was systematically destroying every aspect of my existence, turning me into a pariah that decent people cross the street to avoid. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Saw your car. Good. Maybe now you'll learn to leave that woman alone. Then another. Men like you make me sick. Rachel deserves better. And another. Hope they lock you up before you hurt someone. I turned off my phone and drove home through side streets, checking my mirrors like a criminal. Rachel had weaponized an entire community against me, and I still had no idea how she'd managed to convince Judge Sterling that every lie out of her mouth was gospel truth. But sitting there in my trashed car, surrounded by messages from strangers who wanted me gone, something finally clicked. This wasn't just about custody or even revenge. This was too coordinated, too perfect, too surgical to be random manipulation. Rachel had help. Someone with real influence was backing her play, and I had exactly 1 week to figure out who. Saturday morning, I drove to the public library to use their computers. My home internet felt too exposed, too traceable. If I was going to dig into Rachel's life, I needed to be smart about it. I started with her social media, scrolling back through months of posts. Most of it was the usual divorced mom content, inspirational quotes about strength, photos of Jeremy at various activities, complaints about co-parenting with difficult people. But one post from 3 months ago caught my attention. So grateful for the amazing volunteers at Riverside Animal Shelter. These people are changing lives every day. Volunteer life, animal rescue, Shaktar's community. The photo showed Rachel in a volunteer t-shirt, holding a golden retriever puppy. She was smiling next to an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes. The woman looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. I clicked through to the shelter's website and found their volunteer page. There was Rachel's photo again, listed as volunteer coordinator, weekend adoption events. She'd been volunteering there for 6 months, which was weird because Rachel had never shown any interest in animals during our marriage. She'd refused to let Jeremy get even a goldfish. I scrolled through the shelter's Facebook page, looking for more photos with Rachel in them. There were dozens. Rachel at adoption events, Rachel helping with fundraisers, Rachel posing with staff members and other volunteers. She was everywhere, and she was always with the same group of people. One photo from a charity gala 2 months ago made me pause. Thank you to our wonderful supporters and their families for making tonight a success. The caption listed names of major donors and their spouses. Judge Theodore Sterling and his wife Margaret were in the 3rd row. My pulse quickened. I zoomed in on Margaret Sterling's face, then compared it to the woman in Rachel's first photo. Same silver hair, same smile, same kind eyes. Judge Sterling's wife volunteered at the same animal shelter as Rachel. I spent the next 2 hours digging deeper. The shelter's newsletter archives showed Rachel and Margaret Sterling working together on multiple projects. They were co-chairs of the annual fundraising committee. They'd organized adoption drives together. In every group photo, they were standing next to each other, looking like old friends. But Rachel was good at making fast friends when it served her purposes. This could still be a coincidence, just Rachel being her usual charming self, with someone who happened to be married to our judge. Then I found the crack I'd been looking for. Buried in a local newspaper's society page from 18 months ago was a photo from a college alumni event. Local chapter of Kappa Delta celebrates 40 years of sisterhood. The photo showed about 30 women of various ages, all wearing matching t-shirts. There, in the front row, arms around each other's shoulders, were Rachel and Margaret Sterling. They weren't recent acquaintances who'd met at a dog shelter. They were sorority sisters who'd known each other for decades. I screenshotted everything and drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. This wasn't about Jeremy's best interests or my fitness as a father. This was about Rachel calling in favors from an old sorority sister whose husband happened to be our judge. But I needed more than just photos. I needed proof that they'd been in contact about the case, evidence that Margaret Sterling had influenced her husband's decisions. Photos of them together weren't enough to prove corruption. I called Pete, the only friend who was still taking my calls. Pete, I need a favor. Can you have Sarah look at something without asking too many questions? Dude, Sarah thinks you're losing it. She's not going to help you spy on your ex-wife. I'm not spying. I found proof that Rachel has a personal connection to our judge. They're sorority sisters, Pete. They've known each other for years. Silence on the other end. Pete? Okay, that's actually kind of messed up if it's true. What do you need? Sarah is friends with that woman Monica who works at the courthouse, right? Can she ask Monica if Judge Sterling ever mentions his wife's volunteer work, or if his wife ever talks about the people she works with at the shelter? I'll ask, but Danny, you need to be careful. If you're wrong about this, it's going to make you look completely paranoid. I'm not wrong, I have photos. That evening, Pete called back. Monica says Judge Sterling's wife talks about the animal shelter all the time. Apparently she's really involved there, always talking about the other volunteers like their family. Monica remembers her mentioning someone named Rachel a few times, saying what a dedicated volunteer she is. Did she say anything specific about me or the custody case? Monica doesn't know details, but she did say Mrs. Sterling mentioned being worried about a volunteer whose ex-husband was causing problems for her and her son. She said Mrs. Sterling seemed really concerned about this woman's safety. There it was. Margaret Sterling wasn't just Rachel's sorority sister. She was actively involved in the narrative that I was dangerous. She'd been feeding information to her husband about poor, vulnerable Rachel and her threatening ex-husband. But I still needed smoking gun proof. Photos and secondhand gossip wouldn't be enough to convince anyone that Judge Sterling was compromised. Sunday afternoon, I decided to take a risk. I drove to Riverside Animal Shelter during their weekend adoption hours. If Rachel and Margaret Sterling were as close as the photos suggested, maybe I could observe them together, get some concrete evidence of their relationship. I parked across the street and waited. After about an hour, I saw Rachel's car pull into the parking lot. She got out wearing her volunteer t-shirt and headed inside. 20 minutes later, a silver Mercedes arrived. Margaret Sterling stepped out, also wearing a volunteer shirt. I watched through my telephoto lens as they worked the adoption event together. They weren't just friendly, they were coordinating everything like a well-oiled team. Margaret would point to specific dogs, and Rachel would bring them over to potential adopters. When Rachel talked to families, Margaret stood nearby, nodding and smiling like she was backing up every word Rachel said. During a quiet moment, I saw them step aside for what looked like a private conversation. Margaret put her hand on Rachel's shoulder in a gesture that was clearly supportive, almost motherly. Rachel dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the victim perfectly. I took photos of their interaction, but even as I clicked the shutter, I knew it wasn't enough. Two women talking at a volunteer event wasn't proof of judicial corruption. I needed something that directly connected their personal relationship to my custody case. As I was about to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Jeremy. He rarely texted me anymore. Rachel monitored his phone closely, but this one was just a heart emoji. My kid, trying to let me know he still loved me despite everything his mother was doing. I was so focused on the text that I almost missed what happened next. Margaret Sterling walked Rachel to her car, and they hugged goodbye. But it wasn't a casual volunteer friend hug. It was the kind of long, supportive embrace you'd give to family, or to a sorority sister whose fake custody battle needed all the help it could get. Margaret Sterling pulled out her phone and showed Rachel something on the screen. Rachel nodded, and they talked for another few minutes before Rachel got in her car and drove away. I followed Margaret Sterling at a distance as she left the shelter. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove to an upscale neighborhood I didn't recognize and parked outside a large brick house. She walked up to the front door like she belonged there. The mailbox read Sterling, Judge Sterling's home address, which meant Margaret Sterling had gone directly from her private conversation with Rachel to her husband's house. On a Sunday afternoon, 2 days before our final custody hearing, I sat in my car across the street from Judge Sterling's house, finally understanding the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just about Rachel manipulating one person at a time. She'd been running a months-long campaign through Judge Sterling's wife to poison the well before I'd even stepped into that courtroom. But now I knew their secret, and I had less than 48 hours to figure out how to use it. Monday night, I barely slept. I kept going over everything I'd discovered, making sure I had my facts straight. College sorority sisters, years of volunteering together. Margaret Sterling discussing Rachel's dangerous ex-husband with courthouse staff. The private conversation at the shelter followed by Margaret driving straight to the judge's house. I had photos, but I needed more. I needed something that would force Judge Sterling to admit he knew about the connection. At 5 a.m., I drove back to the courthouse area and parked where I could see the employee entrance. Judge Sterling arrived at 7:45, same as always. I followed him at a distance, watching his routine. Coffee from the cart outside, quick chat with the security guard, elevator to the third floor. I waited until 8:30, then made my move. The courthouse records office was on the first floor. I'd been there before during my first custody filing, so I knew the layout. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Betty, barely looked up when I approached. I need to request public records for Judge Theodore Sterling, I said, trying to sound official. Any recusal motions or conflict of interest declarations filed in the past year. Betty typed something into her computer. You'll need to fill out this form and pay the processing fee. 20 minutes later, I had copies of every recusal motion Judge Sterling had filed in the past 18 months. There were 7 cases where he'd stepped aside due to personal connections or potential conflicts of interest. Financial relationships, family friendships, business partnerships. Judge Sterling was actually pretty good about declaring conflicts when he knew about them, which meant either he didn't know about Rachel and Margaret's relationship, or he was deliberately hiding it. I spent the next hour at the library, cross-referencing the cases where he'd recused himself. In every single instance, the conflict was documented and declared before the first hearing. Judge Sterling had never failed to recuse himself when he discovered a personal connection, except in my case. At 10:30, I called Richard with everything I'd found. Danny, this is huge if you can prove it, but you need rock-solid evidence. Accusations of judicial misconduct aren't something you throw around lightly. I have photos of them together. I have witnesses who heard Margaret Sterling discussing the case. I have documented proof they're sorority sisters. That proves they know each other, but it doesn't prove Judge Sterling knew about the connection when he took the case. Richard, his wife has been discussing my case with courthouse employees. She's been working with Rachel for months. There's no way he didn't know. We need him to admit it on the record, in open court. Tuesday morning arrived gray and rainy, matching my mood perfectly. I dressed in my best suit and drove to the courthouse with a folder full of evidence and a plan that could either save my relationship with Jeremy or destroy what was left of my life. The courtroom was packed. Rachel had invited her entire support network, her sister, her mother, several friends, and at least a dozen people I recognized from Jeremy's school and soccer team. They filled the gallery like she was the victim in a high-profile criminal trial. I sat at the defendant's table with Richard, watching Rachel perform for her audience. She was wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, playing the role of the concerned single mother to perfection. Judge Sterling entered at exactly 9 a.m., and the bailiff called the court to order. "We are here today for final arguments in the custody matter of Brooks versus Sullivan," Judge Sterling announced. "Ms. Sullivan, you may proceed." Rachel stood and delivered a masterclass in manipulation. She talked about her fears for Jeremy's safety, her concerns about my mental state, her desperate attempts to protect her son from his increasingly unstable father. She presented her fabricated evidence with tears in her eyes and conviction in her voice. "Your Honor, I'm not trying to keep Jeremy from his father out of spite. I'm trying to keep him safe. The incidents I've documented show a pattern of erratic behavior that's escalating. I'm terrified of what might happen if unsupervised visitation continues." Judge Sterling nodded along with every word, occasionally asking clarifying questions that seemed designed to let Rachel elaborate on her accusations. When she finished, he looked genuinely moved by her performance. "Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Mr. Brooks, your final argument." This was it, the moment that would determine whether I ever had a real relationship with my son again. I stood up, but instead of walking Walking to the podium, I approached the bench with my folder. Your Honor, before I present my argument, I need to address a serious conflict of interest that's come to light. Judge Sterling frowned. What kind of conflict of interest? Your wife Margaret and my ex-wife Rachel have been working together at Riverside Animal Shelter for 6 months. They're not just casual volunteers. They're co-chairs of major fundraising committees and appear together at every shelter event. The courtroom went dead silent. Rachel's face went white. More importantly, I continued, opening my folder, they've known each other for years. This photo from 18 months ago shows them together at a Kappa Delta sorority alumni event. They're not strangers who happen to meet at a dog shelter. They're sorority sisters who've maintained a close relationship for decades. I handed the photos to Judge Sterling. His hands were shaking slightly as he examined them. Your Honor, Richard stood up. We have additional evidence that Mrs. Sterling has been discussing this case with courthouse personnel, expressing concern for Miss Sullivan's safety and characterizing Mr. Brooks as a threat. This suggests that your wife has been actively involved in shaping the narrative about my client outside of court. That's ridiculous, Rachel burst out. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior I've been talking about. He's been stalking me, following me to volunteer events. Actually, I interrupted, pulling out more photos. These pictures were taken Sunday afternoon at the shelter's adoption event. They show you and Mrs. Sterling working together, having private conversations, and embracing like family members. After your conversation, Mrs. Sterling drove directly to Judge Sterling's residence. Judge Sterling's face had gone completely pale. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and gasps. Your Honor, Richard pressed, my client has documentation showing that Judge Sterling has recused himself from 7 other cases in the past 18 months due to much smaller conflicts of interest. The fact that this relationship wasn't disclosed suggests either a deliberate cover-up or a failure of judicial ethics that calls into question every ruling in this case. This is insane, Rachel shouted, her careful composure finally cracking. Margaret and I barely know each other. We just volunteer at the same place. Then explain this, I said, pulling out the sorority photo and placing it on the evidence table where everyone could see it. Kappa Delta sisters, class of 1987. Front row, arms around each other. Does this look like two strangers to you? Rachel stared at the photo like it was a bomb that had just exploded in her hands. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Judge Sterling was studying the photos with the expression of a man watching his career implode. Where did you get these? The sorority photo is from the Herald Tribune's archives. The shelter photos are from their public Facebook page and website. The photo of your wife at your residence was taken from a public street. All of this information was publicly available, Your Honor, which raises the question of why you didn't know about your wife's close relationship with one of the parties in a case you were presiding over. I didn't know they were sorority sisters, Judge Sterling said quietly. But you knew they volunteered together? Judge Sterling hesitated just long enough to condemn himself. My wife mentioned working with someone named Rachel, but I didn't connect it to this case. Your Honor, Richard said, courthouse staff have confirmed that Mrs. Sterling specifically discussed Ms. Sullivan's custody situation, expressing concern about the dangerous ex-husband who was causing problems for her volunteer friend. Are you telling this court that your wife never mentioned these concerns to you? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Judge Sterling looked at the photos, at Rachel's panicked face, at the packed courtroom full of people who were finally seeing the truth. This court will recess for 30 minutes, he said finally. I need to review these materials and consult with the Judicial Ethics Committee. Your Honor, I said as he started to leave the bench, there's one more thing. I have documentation showing that you've never failed to recuse yourself when a conflict was discovered. You've always done the right thing when you knew about a potential problem. The question isn't whether you'll do the right thing now, it's whether you knew about this connection all along and chose to hide it. Judge Sterling stopped walking. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear people breathing. Court is in recess, he repeated, but his voice was barely a whisper. As the bailiff called for everyone to rise, Rachel grabbed her lawyer's arm. You have to do something, she hissed. This is all circumstantial. They can't prove anything, but they could prove everything, and she knew it. The photos, the timeline, the documented conversations, it all added up to a clear picture of corruption and manipulation. I looked around the courtroom at all the people who'd believed Rachel's lies, who'd treated me like a dangerous criminal for months. They were staring at the evidence table, at the photos that told the real story, finally understanding that they'd been played. Margaret Sterling wasn't in the courtroom, but I could see her influence everywhere. In her husband's biased rulings, in the community's reaction to Rachel's lies, in the systematic destruction of my reputation based on nothing but sorority loyalty. When court resumed 25 minutes later, Judge Sterling looked like he'd aged 10 years. After consulting with the Judicial Ethics Committee and reviewing the evidence presented, I am recusing myself from this case effective immediately. All previous rulings are vacated pending review by an impartial judge. This case will be reassigned within the week. Rachel's supporters sat in stunned silence. Her carefully constructed narrative had collapsed in the span of 30 minutes. Furthermore, Judge Sterling continued, I am referring this matter to the State Judicial Conduct Board for investigation into potential ethics violations. As we filed out of the courtroom, Rachel pushed past me without making eye contact. Her army of supporters scattered quickly, suddenly remembering they had other places to be. For the first time in months, I walked out of a courthouse feeling like justice was actually possible. 3 weeks later, Judge Patricia Walsh awarded me joint custody with a 50-50 split. She spent exactly 20 minutes reviewing the actual facts of the case, Jeremy's grades, my employment record, character references from people who actually knew me, before making her decision. I see no evidence that Mr. Brooks presents any danger to his son, Judge Walsh said. In fact, the evidence suggests he's been the victim of a coordinated campaign designed to manipulate these proceedings. Rachel sat silent through the entire hearing. No tears, no dramatic speeches, no fabricated evidence. Her lawyer looked embarrassed to be there. Judge Sterling resigned 2 days after our hearing rather than face the ethics investigation. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about judicial corruption, mentioning Rachel by name as the party who'd exploited personal connections to influence court proceedings. Her Facebook support group disappeared overnight. The neighbors who'd been crossing the street to avoid me suddenly remembered we were friends. My gym welcomed me back with apologetic smiles. Most importantly, Jeremy came home with me that Friday afternoon and asked if we could build another rocket for the science fair. Dad, were you really as crazy as Mom said you were? No, buddy. I was just fighting really hard to make sure I didn't lose you. He nodded. nodded like that made perfect sense to him. Rachel still lives in town, but she keeps a much lower profile these days. She dropped the volunteer coordinator position at the animal shelter pretty quickly after everything came out. As for Margaret Sterling, she moved to Florida with her husband after his resignation. I heard through Pete that she's volunteering at a different animal shelter down there. I hope for their sake that they're staying away from custody cases this time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.